Um, it's a pleasure to be with you virtually from just outside Bogota, Colombia, where I am currently on sabbatical, hidden away in the garden, and to welcome you all to Better Hospitality and our session, which is a pretty exciting one, on why you should consider experiential dining, both the benefits to you, your team, and to the customers that you may serve. An area close to my heart, and we've got some three interesting and sort of different, I think, approaches to experiential design from what I've read and seen on the internet. I've only had the pleasure so far of attending Chef Joseph Youssef's Kitchen Theory Gastrophysics Chef's Table and Experiences. He's coming to you from sunny High Barnet, it looks like, today, and is a chef patron of Kitchen Theory, kind of a gastronomic, experiential, multi-sensory, and sometimes experimental dining and events as well. And very much at this more technological end, it seems, in contrast to Matthew, of Matthew and Ian Pennington fame, from the truly fabulous looking Barleywood walled garden near Bristol, somewhere where when you see the pictures on the website, you want to go straight there. And that's clearly very much, as I hope we'll see, experiencing nature, but firsthand the real thing. And so there's kind of a contrast there between Joseph's digital nature and Matthew's real nature. Lucky for those who can get to it and be in it. And then we have our third presenter or participant, Jenny Mcneil, of Director of Food at Flavorology, sister to Gingerline, who has been delivering branded experiential multi-sensory food extravaganzas, and also more public-facing, large-scale experiential dining events through Gingerline, if I got it correctly. And again, I think you from our little pre-discussion, it sounded like you were doing both some highly technical digital experiences, but also you mentioned the hunting through the gardens for your treasure hunt, which sounded a bit more nature as well, so kind of crossing the borders. So that's what we've got for today, and the format is going to be, we've got three themes I've been instructed to guide our participants through, and then time for questions at 10 or 15 minutes at the end. So those who are watching, if you want to type your questions into the chat box, then our assistant will hopefully be curating those questions, and we'll come back to them, the most fun ones, at the end. So without further ado, please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. I would like to invite chef colleague Joseph Youssef to get the ball rolling and tell us what his view of experiential dining is, and come back to the question: isn't all dining experiential? Is it just a buzzword?
Yeah, all dining is experiential, I guess. But so we live in an experience economy. People are looking for far more than just a good meal these days when they're going out and spending their hard-earned cash and very valuable time. And as you said, yeah, all dining is experiential in the sense of we're constantly using all of our senses. When we go to when we're eating at any point of the day, whether it's at home, whether it's on a park bench, whether it's on the tube, or whether it's in a fine dining restaurant. But obviously some of those environments lend themselves more towards curating a better experience, where maybe you can get more out of the food, you can enjoy the company more, and maybe have more kind of meaningful memories kind of built around it. And I say the difference between just regular dining and this experiential dining is that with experiential dining, more thought or more mindful thought has gone into the curation of all the different sensory touch points that the guest is going to engage in, and that's everything from, could be the invitation, the welcome, the crockery, the cutlery, the lighting, the fabrics, everything, the bathrooms, any kind of touch point that the guest is going to kind of encounter as part of that experience with you has been kind of finally thought out as part of a kind of bigger picture as to how this all relates to the given theme or idea or experience that you're going through. So that's the difference in a sense of kind of regular dining and experiential dining. But I'd say, you know, maybe we're getting a bit more experimental with things as we go ahead, as we kind of move forward, in the bar, as Jenny was saying, is constantly being set higher and higher. But yeah, I think all dining is experiential, but just a bit more thought goes into the kind of events I think everyone here is curating.
And I suppose one might say, thinking about the napkins and the bathrooms and the greeting, that would be what you'd hope for from any sort of high-end dining encounter. Now, that in itself wouldn't make it an experience. Do you, in contrast to Matthew will ask next, you're, I suppose, in a space and trying to recreate nature in the built environment, in your dining space. So is the difference in a way a bit about immersion, that experiential dining is both thinking about the sensory touch points, but then also making sure your guests are immersed, are taken away somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we had that moment of reflection, you know, last summer, where we had to close down and think about what we were doing, there was a lot of time to consider, to think about all of those touch points that we could build into an experience for guests. And actually, one of the things that we wanted to try and achieve for us was actually trying to get our guests to slow down for a moment. This was an experience point that we thought was probably overlooked in the past. So we'd allow certain points on arrival for the guests to just to calm down a little bit. Be welcomed by team members that really know what they're doing, who really know how to apply a beautiful, warm and genuine welcome. So we'd stage little areas of the experience where we would allow for those moments to happen. And all with a view to sort of, well, in many cases, taking in a view, looking at what is here, stopping to slow down and look at nature in its in situ, because in a moment you're about to get a course or a foodstuff that that is based around the foods that are grown here. So yeah, there are, as Yusuf was saying, there is a real concentration on looking at all the points where a guest can have their experience, and finding points where you can really get every part of that experience right. So yeah, the experiential dining for us has been about focusing on those moments.
Would you, would your persuasive or sort of welcoming hosts, do you do the sort of the personalization and checking them out on your guests on the internet before they turn up to welcome them by name?
I mean, yeah, there is a certain amount of information gathering on from guests before they even get there, and I think being able to be almost on first name terms with 4 or 5 of the guests, especially knowing who is having an experience. If you've had 10 minutes talking with a staff member and they've got an idea of who the guests are, and then that guest is transferred to the next stage of an experience where you're introduced directly to the team member that is going to take you on to the next stage. That information can be really vital in making guests feel that they have had a real personal experience, and in truth, because they have. You'd look at trying to build in ways of having an experience like this where you look for opportunities to be able to do that. It will always lead to people feeling much more content and happy when they have that first course or whatever it is that they're serving.
I suppose Joseph can control his environment, because the nature is stored on the computer in a way, and there are digital projections of the forest with the sounds, and I guess it's never raining in Joseph's forest taste of nature course, whereas in your case you are surrounded by the elements and you're almost at the whim of nature, aren't you?
Yeah,
Does that raining and snowing, does that really then ruin the experience, or are there ways around controlling nature? Or
no, I mean, the common warning is that you can only be underdressed for being outside, can't you? So that we would let our guests know that they need to come, ready for a bit of outside experience. And no, it doesn't detract from it at all. You'd have guests arriving at different points throughout the evening. Some will catch the sunset, some won't, but there'll be an opportunity for everybody to, by the end of the meal, sit outside, fireside, and look over a view, enjoying, a horchata or something beautiful at the end of a meal. I think having that access to being slightly immersed in nature is one of the reasons that we've moved to an experience-based offer. Yeah.
And Jenny, it looks like you do both the across the spectrum there, from sort of highly curated digital experiences through nature-based experiential events. Can you tell us a bit about?
Yeah, so I think that the main thing about most of our events is that there's a storytelling narrative to it. So the environment that you're taking people into has to really reflect the stage of the story that you're in. So that can be something like, for example, the Grand Expedition, where you're actually changing geographical location. So the nature of the environment changes, and that was very much through digital projection. So 350-degree projection, compared with the food and the choreography and the music and all the things that were happening. But it might also be with something like Chambers of Flavor, just the part of the story goes from sort of, warm and comforting to fear to crazy kind of, losing sense of orientation. So there's lots of different techniques through the course of any kind of story where you have the ups and downs and things that we're trying to tell, and using food as the sort of pivot, I suppose, of any environment that you're in. Mainly, I mean, obviously, when you're at the dinner table, you've got someone's attention. They're sitting there and they're sort of almost in your hands to do with what you will, and that's how we sort of pin the story together. So, just for example, if you went through Chambers of Flavor, you might kind of crawl into something that looks like a sort of dusty greenhouse, and your food will look like it's sort of been left rotting on the table for a while, but actually when you eat it, it's full of fermented, wonderful, crispy flavors, and chrome Jerusalem artichokes that look like slugs and things like that. And then the environment might feel cold and smell a bit musty. The interaction will be something that sits alongside it. So it's very much about sort of trying to keep a story narrative, and any environment that you're in at that time, the food underpins the story that's happening around you.
And so in some of the events that you curate, people will physically move from room to room, from environment to environment.
Yeah, we call
another ones it is.
Yeah,
another events. In other events, people stay stationary, like, I don't know, in Chef Paul Paret's Ultraviolet, or even in sort of Joseph's Kitchen Theory, people, for the majority of the meal, are just in one place, and the environment, the experience changes around them.
Yeah.
Having seen both of those, is it possible? Do you get more immersion, more of an experience when people actually move, or can you take people on a journey properly if they're just stuck in the same seat at the table throughout the night?
It's definitely a different set of challenges with each one. I think, with the multi-room dining, so we've done up to sort of 7 chambers, I suppose, where people are moving around, and obviously from a logistical perspective, you've got to take their dietary, requirements with them. You've got to take the whole group and know where the whole group is at any time. But I think certainly from what we've been known for, a lot of people do expect multi-room format now, and they love that part of it. They love the fact that it's completely unexpected. They know very little about what's happening in the experience. They don't know the menu before they arrive, for example. They don't know what dimensions they're going to go to, and people have definitely wanted that sort of real shock, I suppose, that you get from these different chambers as Gingerline has kind of progressed. Then you have the people that will, so you might have people that will come to something having only experienced multi-dimensional dining, and then they suddenly come to something that's single room, and there can be a little bit of a hesitation at first, or thinking, oh, I've thought it was going to be crawling up a mountain or sliding down something into a ball pit or whatever it was. But that's the challenge, right? That's our challenge, to make sitting statically as interesting, if not more exciting, than just physically moving. And that's where Sez Mountfort, one of the founders of Gingerline, came up with the use of animation to really move you. I mean, you're sitting in essentially a giant physical hot air balloon, and the animation, because it's 360, makes you feel like you're physically taking off and landing in different places. And then through choreography and music and the way that the people are interacting with you, you really do feel like you're either in a kind of version of Siberia versus the carnival in Brazil. And obviously the food is there to kind of pin that into place whenever you're at any particular location.
Joseph, Jenny, sort of stressing there the importance of storytelling, and that's something close to your own heart as well. Do you think, is it possible to offer experiential dining without a story?
No, you'll always have some kind of a story there, whether it's a brand story, whether it's a theme that you've made up or something. And I think that's kind of an important part of it, just having, because that allows you to build a narrative around the experience and allows you to take people on a journey. And I think that's why the storytelling part is kind of essential, because, well, you mentioned, let's say here, or even Ultraviolet, Paul Perret, you were saying that they're static at one table. That's not true. When you go to Paul Perret's place, you go to a bar first, you're picked up in a car, you're taken over to their place, you go up in this kind of faux elevator, then you get into the restaurant. Here, similarly, you come here, you have, you know, champagne reception, then you go into the screening room, then you go into the study, then you go to the table, or to the past, then to the table. And I'd say probably the same with what you do, Matthew. I heard you mention at the end that people kind of end up sitting outdoors around a fire. And I think everywhere now, whether even if you are sat at one table for the majority of your meal, there is still that element of allowing people to discover new areas or taking them through a bit of a journey, both physically and through obviously the food. And yeah, I think, you know, there has to be some story that you're telling. And as I said, that could be the brand story. So you could be talking about their values or their product or their characteristic or whatever it is that you want to talk about. Or it could be talking about nature and where you get your produce from. It could be either, or it could be, you know, about traveling the world, or any other theme that, you know, kind of sets a tone and allows you to kind of build a journey kind of based upon it.
And Matthew, do you have? Is the story of you and the place, or
No, not really.
does the nature speak for itself?
Yeah, that's the bit we're most excited about, I think. That's the bit we want to point our guests towards, I think. So yeah, that's our narrative. And like Jenny was saying, yeah, I would be surprised for us to take in something like trying to scare or worry a guest, of course, or to throw fear on top. I think we've always thought, you know, okay, we need to try and build warmth, and the idea that a course, even though of course is perfect, and we know it's going to be perfect, that the way that it's delivered in that scenario is the best opportunity to get that right. So yeah, it's an interesting, and it would be an interesting idea to play with fear. We have led narrative for some of our events where we have taken the idea of poisonous as part of a meal. So we've presented several points through the meal where a guest could choose between, you know, a jack-o'-lantern mushroom or a chanterelle, and they're both powders, and they'll get these on the dishes, and one will kill you, one won't. You'll get to the end of the meal and we'll give you a little envelope, and it'll tell you, have you survived, or how badly maimed you were, or you know, but all with a view to trying to get people understanding a little bit more about nature and the wilds, and that which is our food locale and the supporting systems that go into that.
But and could guests come to you and leave without knowing the story of you and your brother and the place, or is that integral?
No, I think that we've given so much opportunity to have a conversation with guests as they come through, that they may actually feel like that they know us and the team. I think that's really also really valuable. One of the things that I've seen that has really been of benefit throughout lockdown is the fact that my team themselves are now outside in nature, spending the time on the floor, gathering foods, understanding ingredients, and thinking about ways in which they can incorporate them into dishes that they deliver themselves to the guests with all the anecdotal knowledge that comes with that, the funny story about somebody falling in or whatever, and the guests themselves are there to they feel like they've had a genuine, well, they have had a genuine experience with that server at that point, or anybody that they've met through that journey. So yeah, it feels like we've had an opportunity to get much more personal and much more true to our narrative. And yes, people are leaving understanding the narrative better than they have ever done before. I'd say that's one of the benefits of having to think that, well, we can only put 30 people through this venue at one time. Is that you've allowed that extra time for guests to feel relaxed, comfortable, happy, listened to, and they leave with a very, very memorable idea of that. So yeah, I think it would be quite hard.
And the experience you only do at night?
Yeah, I mean, we were planning
previously
to do
you only did.
Yeah, we it's a nighttime experience, but yeah.
A single sitting?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm sort of interested at the moment. There's huge literature on the benefits of being in nature for our well-being, especially under lockdown. Mental health issues decline, stress, well-being, all sorts of metrics. We live longer if we live closer to nature. So there's a huge emerging body of this sort of biophilia, or call it what you like. I've been sort of curious at how chefs who don't have the access to nature, like Joseph necessarily, or the Fat Duck, say how the chefs are sort of bringing nature into their restaurants, and it's done as a experiential course, the sounds of the sea, or Roygen Servant's Joseph's dish with jellyfish and the sounds of the sea and crunch, or the sounds of the forest. But every time it seems like it's sort of digital nature being brought into the restaurant to match the food and to help tell the stories. But I sort of wonder whether, in fact, what's also going on is that you're sort of triggering the nature effect. And that's sort of what you're doing, maybe intuitively or implicitly or just accidentally, that by putting your guests close to the source, surrounded by nature, not only might they come away feeling better because of what they've eaten and the stories they've heard, but also just being surrounded by the sights, the sounds, the smells, assuming it's not raining, I guess, but
well, even if it has rained, if they've slowed down and had time to relax and think and take that time thinking about nature, then that's probably the most positive thing that we can hope for them to leave with, really.
Joseph, do you think you can? Do you think about that nature effect, or do you think you can give people sort of benefit to their well-being through projection mapping and scent and ambient sound, if it's immersive enough?
Yeah, perhaps. I think, kind of as Jenny mentioned, it's all those elements, like what people are like. If you want to take people out to the forest, having that kind of smell of petrichor, having the kind of deep dark forest projected onto the walls or table or whatever it may be, having maybe the wind kind of coming through, or all these elements will help. But I don't know, as human beings, if we're that easily fooled. I think it's great for transporting people, and it's great for maybe mentally transporting people to a place. And I think, again, Jenny mentioned, the food is the kind of part that brings it all together and makes the situation congruent. But I don't think you'd sit in that digital environment if the food wasn't there, and that would be enough to satiate your need for, or your human appreciation, let's say, of just being out in nature. And I don't think it'll ever replace that.
Well, you might wonder about the screen savers we have on our computers. That's sort of just a kind of a digital nature. And if you stare at it and you've got a big enough screen, it seems to have some benefits, not the full nature effects, but in part. And one paper I've just been reading from 1977 in Science about what's wrong with plastic trees and plastic plants. You think they should be terrible, and yet in fact lots of the benefits seem to accrue. Maybe if you don't know they're plastic, but I'm very interested in that, how much the digital can take the place of the actual ones. And Jenny, have any of your journeys taken people through nature environments?
Yes, we've cooked outside. We've well, I mean, yeah, I don't think you've been a sort of chef in the events industry in London if you haven't cooked in an alleyway or cooked in a park or something. Yeah, we've cooked all over the place in the UK and sometimes in Europe. But I think for me, the immersive part and the kind of bit about mental health and getting away from it all is really giving someone a sort of suspension of reality for a period of time. So it's you're not necessarily away from it all in a true kind of going to nature perspective, but you are away from your life. You are away. There's enough going on and there's enough to engage you at any time that you can't really think about the other concerns and stuff that you've got going on. So that's the bit that sort of is the suspension of reality and enjoyment of that. And I think I think we're always aware that with what we're doing, that you are aware that you are in a version of reality. It's not real. It is a story, and there is always that thing of any kind of art or performance where you all, even if you're really 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 immersed, you're always going to be aware that you're watching a play or you're watching a film. It's not real. So I wouldn't like to try and pit my wares against the reality of being able to eat mole on the beach and it being that really amazing sensory thing that you get of eating the thing of where it comes from in the place that it was sort of invented, with the beer that goes with it, because you're never going to be able to recreate that in the same way. So for us, it's best not to try and recreate something that already exists in perfection somewhere else, and sort of suspend reality in a bit of a different way that we can control, which is normally a new story, a new dialect, a new piece of choreography, projection, whatever it might be, that we can contain, that we can do really really well, rather than just trying to mimic something that already exists. Really.
And do you think it's too much of a stretch to think, over the last few years there have been various press reports that a third of Brits choose their holiday destination based on the cuisine, gastro-tourism? This wasn't the case previously, but a third of at least young adults going abroad are picking it based on the food to have culinary adventures of some sort, given all their constraints on travel and such like. Do you think there will be a market once things open up for people taking those digital journeys instead of, if we can't travel to these places, then let's take a sort of a curated journey, staying in London or wherever it might be?
Yeah. I think to some extent. I mean, it's interesting actually. We've got a couple of menus on at the moment. One there's a Florida menu, a Visit Florida menu, and one there's a Czech collaboration to go with a quartet that are performing some Smetana music. And actually, I think certainly with the Visit Florida one, because it's an amazing menu, but I just thought it was something that people were really craving right now, that idea of being away in sunshine and through food and all that kind of stuff. But actually I would say that the success isn't what you would think it'd be, because it's not real. It's not travel. And I think mimicking travel with a staycation, you're much better trying to find something that we do in this country really well than trying to sort of trying to attempt to think that you're on the Amalfi Coast when you're not. So I think that's why British food, and that includes internationally influenced British food in this country that's been doing really well. You're better off sort of focusing on those really great experiences that you can actually achieve than trying to imagine that you're not here. I would think that's what I would choose to do.
Chef Joseph, I guess you were having your portfolio of experiences that you've curated over the last 5 or so years. Mexico, which I guess that's going back 5 years now, isn't it, more or less? And that was trying to take people in a way, give them the full Mexican experience that you had, without, for those who had never been to Mexico. Could that be something you might be thinking about bringing back? Virtual gastro-tourism?
No, but actually one of the things that kind of along those lines, one of the things that we've been talking about with one of the brands that we work with is developing a dining experience that is kind of based on a kind of airline theme, with the idea of kind of taking people around. And obviously the idea came about from this idea that people right now aren't able to travel, want to travel. And I guess the idea with it really was that a lot of what people enjoy about traveling, and this was with the Mexico concept that we did, and even with the Nordic concept that we did, people obviously enjoy traveling to these places for themselves and experiencing it for themselves. But part of it as well is maybe learning things about the culture, learning things about the music, learning things about the food, learning things. And that's what we weave into these narratives and stories. So, you know, one of the courses, for example, was called, you know, on the Mexico menu was called An Offering to the Gods. And that was kind of based on the Mexican National Ballet. One of the pieces that they do is called the Venison Dance. And we would screen that so that they could watch it, and then we would serve a venison. And one of the reasons being it's a beautiful piece of ballet, and a learning point for most people that a lot of the diners that came had no idea that you'd find an ingredient like venison in Mexico. It was just not something that they would expect. So, you know, it's not just about, it's obviously about traveling to the place and getting there, but it's also a lot about what enriches your, I guess, memories or the things that you learn about other cultures that as you go along the way. So I think those parts you can take and you can put into these experiences. But whether that will satiate people's travel bug, I have no idea. I think some people, you know what, just like getting on airplanes. I hate airports, but I think for some, it's the whole ritual of getting on the airplane, taking off, landing somewhere new. And I think we all, if anything, even as someone who hates airports, even I'm missing that right now.
And did you see that? I saw in the press recently that in, I think it's Narita Airport in Japan, they're offering $450 for people to get on the airplane and have a first class meal and a first class seat while stuck on the tarmac. Just for those who are craving their travel so much, like
and then
Steve Keller, I
bring
imagine.
them back down.
In one version, I've seen that, but in the Narita one, it's just static. You just stay on the tarmac and have the chef come down and say hello and talk to you.
I think it was Singapore Airlines that did the one where you take off, they fly you around, and they bring you back down.
And Matthew, does the food you serve is very much of the place? The stories you tell are of the place and its history. Is the food you serve then? Is it of we say sort of locally inspired? I mean, could you almost think of gastro-tourism coming to Bristol to have the food of that part of the country, or is it, it could be the same food could be served at any garden around the country?
I mean, I think the limitation on us from day one was that we try and use everything that we had. It was in our catchment area. What came of that was the idea that actually the food that we serve seems to taste of this area. Which is what I find exactly, and which is what I find exciting about getting on a plane, going to Mexico, and having that experience somewhere else. If it represents that, and you can't do that in a chain, if it represents that wherever you go, I think that brings huge validity to tourism through food experience. So yeah, we've largely stuck to trying to represent flavors that are specific to our limited area in a way, and yeah, hopefully that brings that gives people a reason to come and taste something that tastes just like full of it. Well, we've started working with British pulses and grains and what have you. We apply fermentation methods to those to make koji, to make ferments of miso, and these are all garnished with things that are from the garden directly, either foraged, preserved, or fermented. So yeah, each of those courses has an opportunity for us to apply an element like that on the dishes that we do, but in theory ought to taste like you say of terroir or of a place.
Well, I was wondering, does that part of the country, let's call it the West Country,
A West Country.
British geography. Does that have its own kind of style of cuisine in any way, or recipes that are of that part of the world that we wouldn't find in Yorkshire?
Yeah, to a certain degree, of course. Yeah, and we are, we do, like anybody, we do reference things from around the world and techniques and methods. I think when you use an ingredient from a place, it's going to taste like that place. That's what you're hoping.
Hopefully.
And equally, the care and attention that goes into sourcing ingredients that are particularly good, the result of the finishing dish is better than using a generic ingredient foodstuff. It just tastes better. There's more nutrition packed in there. There's more things that are available to the body. You feel satiated by it. There are multiple layers to choosing a well-grown or a well-produced product over any other. Yeah.
And do you think about, because sort of mindfulness and mindful eating is becoming more and more popular or trendy? Is part of what the service and the experience, then is that partly around having your guests become more aware or mindful, and through that the food tastes better and it becomes more satiating the more you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's twofold. It works not only for the guests, we can focus on getting that dish absolutely perfect, and then having 3 of those dishes throughout the whole journey of that evening that are really at the key points of when it can be most right for the guests. We can focus on getting those absolutely spot on, with a view to not only that being the guests that enjoy that, but the team themselves are not overworked. They're keeping to a regular working week because we've limited the hours. They are having time outside in nature themselves, and hopefully going out on walks with their family, encouraging our guests to do exactly the same thing. So it's got to be, it can't only be for the guests, it has to be for everybody that's involved in that restaurant project. Is what we're trying to achieve at the moment.
That's something I think comes up tomorrow in the conference. I've got a note here. There's a session on creating the right working environment. So those who are listening in and interested, please do put a few questions in the chat box. I don't see much as yet. And Joseph, you also think, or struck by your approach, that you're always making sure that your team have time. I mean, both that your use of technology and experience design is also, I guess, about being mindful, I think, and at the same time,
well, I think
Matthew said about, you're always very focused on the well-being of your team and giving them time to learn stuff, experiment, or
I think a lot of a lot of the work that and research that I've done with you over time as well about kind of sensory flavor perception requires a certain degree of mindfulness. I think people get a lot more out of the experience so what we do here at the Chef's Table kind of really does get people. So we talk about experiential dining, and a lot of the time maybe that gets associated with as well. And there is an element of that showmanship and theater and all that goes with it. But there is also, I guess, coming from a fine dining background, a certain element that this is about the food, and what we want people to do is experience it with all their senses and experience it. I guess the difference for me is that when you go to a restaurant, you'll sit down, you'll order something, you might take a moment when the dish is first served and you'll try it and, oh, that's great. And then you'll kind of proceed. I guess you proceed with just kind of like chatting and eating away. And that's what you're supposed to do. I mean, that's all part of it. I guess our experiences, when we talk about kind of immersing people into it, it's more about keeping them, kind of keeping their senses engaged, getting them to focus on what they're smelling, what they're tasting, what they're seeing, what they're hearing. And you're constantly nudging people towards that. Of course, at the end of the day, you want people to sit down and just have a great conversation, enjoy the company that they're in. That's why they're there. But nonetheless, you do want to, and it could be anything. It could be spraying an atomizer, it could be dry ice, or it could be just, taking a cloche off of something and having the aroma of the food come up and just making people, you know, having those kind of maybe triggers that get people to engage their senses, having different types of cutlery on the table or crockery that people want to engage with and touch and feel. So it doesn't always have to be real techie stuff, or it doesn't, you know, sometimes it is just about kind of nudging people and guiding them towards making sure that they're being mindful of what it is they are eating. And the same for us when we're designing the experiences as a team. I think the team have to have a certain degree of mindfulness towards what they think the guest is experiencing, because that's a big difference for me between 20 years ago of working in restaurants and today. 20 years ago, if anything, 20, 30 years ago in fine dining, guests were a bit of a pain that you fed your amazing food, and they kind of showed up at lunchtime and got in the way of you doing prep. And they came and it was all kind of, you know. Now though, I think it's a lot more user, or like, you know, user-centered design kind of thought goes into it, as in, what is my guest going to experience? Whereas in 20, 30 years ago, chefs were thinking about how am I going to display my artistry for my guests? And I think that's still around till now, but it's changing undoubtedly. And I think that's one of the big changes that I've seen in the industry, that it's shifted from more of a kind of focus on who the celebrity chef is, what it is that they're, or, you know, what it is that they're doing, into more of stories around the produce. And now you can start seeing it shifting more towards even just who you are as a diner, personalizing the experience around you. Everything you mentioned, from mentioning your name when you arrive, having, signed menus, personalized signed menus, dietaries, whatever you can as well, with little things that can kind of take into, people can see if you're left or right-handed, how you lay out the cutlery, or anything like that that you can do to kind of personalize the experience. All of that is becoming, you know, a bigger focus of, I guess, how these food experiences are being designed in general.
And would you call that sort of, you know, sometimes you mention sort of, what you do is not just about a feast for the senses, but a sort of edutainment.
Yeah, well, I think people love learning.
Think of the mindfulness as a part of that. When you think about, you know, having your guests be more.
Yeah, of course, because people love learning. I think now, again, going back to that idea of we're in an experience economy, people are looking for more than just a meal or more than just a good holiday and a beach to sit on. I think, you know, we want to go on holiday and come back with interesting stories about things that we've learned and seen. We want to go for dinner and come back and be able to say, well, did you know, or guess what, I just tried jellyfish for the first time, or did you know that 80% of what you perceive as flavor comes from what you smell? Little things that people can take away with them, that you're educating people, or it could be with brands. Did you know that, I don't know, Audi, for example, do this, or did you know that this, or it's just about kind of weaving in, as part of those narratives and stories, little things that people can take away that they feel that they didn't know when they first arrived. And I think that's really important to these experiences.
And Jenny, I guess it seems that there's an increasing sort of how do you call it, sort of merging of, there are chefs who are getting increasingly interested in delivering experiences, multi-sensory experiences on and off the plate. And there are the experience designers, the culinary artists who are come more from the experience background, who offer food as part. And you used the term earlier when you were answering an earlier question about you use the food as a pivot in the experience. I'm sort of wondering, so I haven't had the good fortune to try anything from ginger line or flavorology yet, but I see in the press some of the other experience providers who offer experience with food get sort of criticized that it's too much about the experience and the food is just there, but it's not really, you could sort of think that it might get Chef Joseph sort of upset. How do you think about the sort of the weighting of, you know, how important the experience and how important the food, which plays kind of the lead? And
I think it depends where the idea comes from. I'd say that there are definitely some experiences that are more chefy than others. You know, I think with multi-room, it's harder to be chefy, to be really chefy, because sometimes people are entering a room and actually the food has to be pre-placed or like hidden in that room. And if you think about, you know, the way that food degrades over time, you know, if it's got to be there 5 minutes since it's sort of been made in the kitchen, then the things that you really want to do as a chef, you can't do. So you're sort of working within a whole bunch of constraints that the performative environment put on you. And so certainly with multi-room, although you know, I'm super proud of the food, and I think the food is great and really interesting and definitely follows that narrative. When it comes to sort of the single space, you know, diner not moving, I would say that we can be a bit more chefy. We can push some of those sort of textures and flavors, and it's actually probably more really texture if you think about like crispy and heat and things like that that do really involve a very quick time from pass to diner. You can control that more in the single room environments than you can in multi-room, just because of the general logistics of it all, really. So obviously as a chef, I'm like, I really want to do the more chefy stuff, and so there's always going to be a bit of a tension between sort of, you know, performance design and putting food in that, and which comes first. You know, is it the dish and then the performance gets kind of wrapped around that to enhance the dish, or is it the story and then that's the brief, and say, you know, am I going to design dishes that essentially like reverse engineer into that story? And I'd say that with us it's definitely an ebb and flow. You know, there are ones where we've just really wanted to do a concept that's based on a particular dish or food because we know that it's going to sensorially set off some pings, and so we'll create a narrative that only just kind of amplifies that out and out. And then there's somewhere, you know, people have to go through the spider room for the story to make sense, so I need to design something that's going to sit in a spider's web and be okay to eat, you know. So it's very much like a two-way thing, you know.
And so in some ways you're sort of led by the clients that you're working with.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe they come with a more of one or the other.
Actually, I would say with the client side, so when we're doing the branding and corporate side, I probably have more creative control over that, because they actually don't, you know, they're putting themselves in our hands, so we can control the sort of level of immersion. That they might have questions about, you know, how far they want to push their audience, or you know, how long the experience is, or what the kind of brand messages are. And sometimes we try and make the brand messages very you know, very integral. There's not going to be loads of logos everywhere. You've got to feel it all the way through. But they don't really sort of push back in terms of narrative. So we're the ones that are sort of creating that narrative for them, and then can control the food environment. It's more probably with the Gingerline consumer things, where the stories are bigger and bolder, where, you know, we have to, as Gingerline, I suppose, in a way, is my client, we have to really think a lot harder, because also normally the numbers are bigger. You've got sort of 100, 150 people a night, to get through these experiences. So that I would say is slightly more challenging, and the multi-dimensional stuff is more challenging than something in the corporate side, where I can really advise, you know, what's the best kind of adventure.
Cool. And finally, I'll ask Matthew, before we get to the questions. We do have a question in the chat now. I was reminded of this quote from, not being a chef myself, or creating food. I'm sort of fascinated by this sort of the weighting of the experience versus the food in any kind of offering. And Matthew and Paul Bocuse, I think, once famously said, you know, the majority of fine dining was the experience and not the food. I haven't been able to pin down originally where the quote came from, but he sort of, you know, put the weighting on the experience. And in your case, I guess, when I looked at your website, you had put a number. It seemed like almost that for a lunch was served at £55, and the full sensory experience was 120. So then, in a way, the consumer is paying more for the experience part than the food, or it might seem. How do you think about the value of that experiential component?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to get the experience absolutely beautifully spot on, but you can't. It doesn't work if the food doesn't hit where it needs to. It's got to be an equal balance. I think one of the things that restaurants have had is about, it's been, in the time that restaurants have existed as just a, we don't know how many guests are turning up this week. We don't know how many people we're going to serve. We don't know if we're going to get, you know, booked out completely. Those nights where it's booked out completely, there isn't enough time spent by a team member for a table to feel like they've had an experience that is worthy of whatever the price of you know, it is anyway. So where this is all flipped for us is moving from a business model that has unknowns to a business model of knowns, a structure that allows us to say that we have the right number of staff employed, and the result is that the experience thing is the bit that's concentrated on the most from a guest perspective, and then also the food is exactly right. We've taken it as far as, because we're now a ticketed event model, we can, even in our food procurement, we can kill to order. So, you know, the fish that we use or the duck is killed to order. It's not just bought from a supply chain. There's several steps to that lead to actually more moments of deliciousness. And if those are delivered in a timely way, in a relaxed and informal way for the, you know, from the staff themselves, then you start to get into an experience that is worthy of, you know, something like a theatre trip or, you know, an evented ticket. The ones that Jenny does sound absolutely amazing. I can't wait to get to them.
And I guess so in the past, then you would have had served the same food would have appeared on just the regular lunch menu and as part of the experiential menu. So it'd be possible in a way to do experiments. I can see why I'm getting excited to sort of compare how does people's ratings of one and the same dish change when it's encapsulated in a story, because no one else, they either do the experience or they serve the food, but there's very rarely a chance to actually kind of, you know, monetize or quantify, say, the benefit.
The whole process is reversed when you turn into a ticketed operation. It's a new paradigm. It's fascinating. We're enjoying that, and we're enjoying the creativity that allows us, and the creativity that can essentially leave with each guest that comes and experience that. It's exciting.
Something we should have been doing all along, shouldn't it? More and more restaurants get that sort of ticketed format, and
yeah, why not?
Both and be able to.
It solves a lot of the problems that come with, you know, no shows, all sorts of other things. You know, knowing how much stock you need, knowing how much time you want to invest in that week. Yeah, I mean, I know it doesn't apply to every experience, and we are talking about food in the realm of, you know, experience-based food rather than, you know, eating calories and just moving on. But yeah. It is an exciting time.
So there was that moving to a ticketed model, and I guess Joseph as well is a ticketed event. Where that also plays to this sort of, you know, the increasing theatricalization of this sort of experiential dining, that you then sort of take on the language of the ticket that you buy in advance, and there's places like in Chicago, Grant Achatz, you know, would then, so, you know, start saying, okay, depending, and the Fat Duck was doing this just during and before lockdown, we'll offer our tickets at different prices. The food's the same, but depending whether it's, you know, the prime sittings of Friday night, Saturday or Sunday, whereas £200 off for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and something in between for Thursday. So that whole sort of, you know, the mentality of the theatrical experience and its organization kind of gets carried over to the restaurant, as well as the experiential elements. We've got a couple of questions in here. One from Domini to everyone. I know selling an experience has influenced Matthew's business model. Could you explain more about how that change in business model has benefited his business and his team?
Yeah, I think for us, again, as I was talking about earlier about the idea of planning and having a structure, being aware of what is coming in the calendar in the next 3 months allows us to invest that time in the team, and delivering the experience for the guest. There's a lot more planning involved, but it's equally something that feels finite. There's only so many spaces now, and it might be it might be half of what we were doing before, but hopefully that's delivered twice as much to the guest, and hopefully twice as much to the team themselves, who have better support, better living practice, and a better understanding of the very thing that we're waffling on about, which is nature and the outdoors.
And how big a team are you looking after or working with?
In the region of 20 to 25. Yeah, it's only a small footprint restaurant, but I love the fact that each one of those are vastly knowledgeable in the different areas of food and drink that we've encouraged them into, and they're all coming to this with their own ideas and own understanding. We're learning as well, even 12 years in, from them. So yeah, we fought tooth and nail to keep them through this lockdown, and we really hoped that we've set a blueprint for a sustainable future in what we're attempting here, and one that might transport to other places as well. Yeah, I know that Jenny and Yusuf can have the ability to be able to move those to different venues and different areas and across the world, and yeah, those are very exciting in themselves. But yeah, we'd hope to be able to get to that position as well one day, beyond the walled garden. Oh, I think Charles, I think you're muted.
Okay. One final question here for me. Relating to your work on the impact of the indoor environment on well-being and productivity, do you have any thoughts on how restaurants can better design their kitchen environments for the benefit of their team? I suppose one of the most obvious things might be exposure to, I think the shift from the kind of the closed kitchen hidden in the basement that no one would never see daylight, to the open kitchen. While that in part has been, I suppose, for the benefit of the guests to see their food being prepared, there's also probably let a little bit more light into that working environment, and anything that can be done to get more exposure to natural sunlight, I think is very, very important. I know in Joseph's kitchen, you can see there in the background, if he was to turn his camera around, you'd see that his kitchen space is surrounded by floor to ceiling windows in the sort of factory where he works. And so that's a sort of brilliant working environment to be exposed to the natural elements to some degree. And I was just here in Colombia, and bizarrely in the middle of the mountains, middle of nowhere, there's a restaurant down the hill with San Pellegrino, South America, top 50 listed, hard to believe. And they're kind of closed, as the restaurants are in the UK, but they've opened up their roof terrace. They've got 2 floors, a beautiful restaurant, a dark kitchen, and now they've just opened a roof terrace. And there all the chefs are working on the roof, again, surrounded by nature 360 open. And what a beautiful kind of environment, how much better for their mental health that will be than being closed away. So that would, I think, have to be the top recommendation, to get out where possible. And just as sort of, I suppose, an acknowledgement as well about the, well, my question about the role of music. I've written in the past about whether you want your kitchens and your kitchen team, should they be allowed to listen to music or should they not in prep or in service? And the chefs seem to divide on that one. And I'm not sure quite which would be better for a working environment, but probably with music, I would imagine. Certainly people would chop and dice and slice a little bit quicker. Yes. So I think that takes us to 3:01 in the UK. So it remains to thank you all for tuning in. Thank our 3 participants for some intriguing thoughts and comments. I wish we could go on for longer. And to remind you that there are sessions tomorrow, one on how to create the right working environment, building on that last question. And I think we have another session tomorrow that might be of interest. Maybe that's the one. So hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And yes, I think I'll see Joseph definitely in Matthew's space one of these days when I get back to the UK. And thanks, Jenny, Joseph, and Matthew for taking part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting. That was ace. Yeah, really enjoyed it.